Hey everybody, so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about conventional agriculture versus regenerative agriculture. So my husband and I, we definitely practice regenerative agriculture or sustainable agriculture. They're both a little bit different, but very similar in the same respect. We started with sustainable and then we kind of went more the regenerative side of things. And there is a very big difference between that kind of mindset for agriculture and then conventional agriculture. Conventional agriculture, you have usually livestock just roaming however many acres you have completely. Now there is the instance where like our neighbors across the street, the property we own now, they use this as their winter field basically, that they ran their cattle through in the wintertime so that they gave their fields some rest. So there is a little bit of that does go on in conventional agriculture where they do move them to different fields. But for the most part, what you see with conventional agriculture is just large quantities of cattle just roaming across hundreds of acres potentially, and that's it. They have free range over the entire property. Regenerative agriculture is different in the sense that there is more, what's considered more like mob grazing or even rotational grazing. They're both, you can do rotational grazing with the mob grazing included into it. So rotational grazing is basically what you do is where you move your animals basically from like paddock to paddock to paddock. Like you have your property broken up into different paddocks and you move them into different spots on a very quick basis. With mob grazing, it's doing the same thing but having large quantities of animals going into a very small area where they just basically mow it all down and then you quickly move them to the next spot. So it's basically the same concept, but mob grazing is much larger quantities of animals in a smaller space. Rotational grazing, you can still absolutely do that, but a lot of times rotational grazing is just moving sheep or livestock from one paddock to the next, not necessarily having as high density of livestock in it, but absolutely you can still do mob grazing as rotational grazing and whatnot. The reason for that is that it makes the animals eat all the food. So I've talked in different videos about why we do rotational grazing, but with our sheep are just like people. They're going to eat the kind of grasses if you have a plate of food, you're going to eat the things you like the most, and then you're going to move on to the things you like the least. Sheep are the same way. All livestock's the same way. They're going to eat the grasses that they like the most, and then they're going to move on to the plants or other grasses and greenery and things like that they don't like nearly as much. So a lot of times what will happen is if you have animals just roaming free range, they're going to eat all the stuff they like the most, and then they'll work down like kind of that way to where it kind of gets to where the field just is left with all the stuff they don't really like, and they're going to have to eat more of that. And what happens is they keep going back to the same spots that have the same grasses they really like, and they keep eating them down so much so that they eventually stop growing because they've eaten it all, ripped it up out of the ground or whatever. Especially if you have like cattle or horses or things like that, they can actually rip things out of the ground, rip the roots right out of the ground. With rotational grazing and mob grazing, you have animals going through specific areas at specific times, and then they do not even touch those areas again until who knows how long. Depends on how big your property is, depends on how much grass you have, and depends on the kind of animals you're also going through that property. So there is a big difference. There's a lot of different things that go into like rotational grazing and mob grazing and things like that versus conventional agriculture. One of the really big benefits too is helping to create biodiversity on your property. So like with our property right now, even though it's winter time, we've had several freezes. And like the night before last, it got so cold that in our sheep water buckets, there was literally like an inch of ice on top of it. I had to bust it up with a sledgehammer the next morning. So we've gotten plenty of cold weather. There was lots of ice on the ground the other day. Our fields were completely frosted. But the great thing was obviously it warmed up, but there's still so much life. We still have like sections of our field covered in winter rye, clovers, ferns. We have a lot of broadleafy greens. We have wild garlic. It's amazing to see what happens when you let the land rest and do its thing and regenerate itself. Or even like in the spring and summertime, we didn't get our sheep onto our property until, I want to say, probably about July. So by that point, the spring season and summer season had a lot of growing that already happened in that time period. And the grasses were so like huge. Like I'm talking, I was walking through grass up to my hips, and the seeds obviously were just falling everywhere. Now, there is a big benefit to having animals going through that, pushing the seeds into the ground and things like that. But what that allowed us to do is allowed the spring and summer grasses to just grow and be able to drop their seeds versus having animals like the cattle coming in and eating them down. Because when we came in, when we bought the property, when we came in April, they still had the cattle on the property and there was like nothing. And I mean, absolutely no grass on this property. Or if there was grass, well, there was grass. It was just very, 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 very short. And there were no broadleafy greens. There was no garlic or anything like that. There was nothing other than just regular plain looking grass. And so it was really nice to see the diversity that came forth from letting the land get some rest. Now we have our animals going through it and they're still eating grasses and everything like that. Yes, some of the grasses have died off. That's fine. You know, it's obviously wintertime now, so the spring grasses aren't necessarily here anymore. But, you know, the sheep now are, you know, walking through these areas and pushing down all the seeds into the, you know, the soil and everything like that. So there's a purpose for regenerative agriculture. If you look at areas, I've actually read some studies about areas in like Africa and places like that where they stopped letting the animals roam free range and started actually managing, you know, livestock more and having them in certain locations, and the land just fell apart. I'm trying to remember the book that I read that in. It's something by Alan Savory. It was a book by Alan Savory. It's got a green cover. I'll look up the name of it and send it and put it in the comments. But it was very eye-opening in the fact that when you let animals kind of do their thing and actually move from different locations, like animals don't stay in the same spot all the time. If you let animals free range roam, they're going to move with the grasses and with the seasons and everything like that. And while yes, we still have our animals on our, you know, 20 acres of pasture, we have them moving through different areas at different times, so it does allow the land to get rest. So that's something that is very interesting to see, and it's very interesting to see the difference in between our neighbor's property right now, who he ran 50 head of cattle on it for a long time, and 5 horses, and he did the conventional way, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's his way. But it's interesting to see, and I'll do another video about this showing the difference between his field and our field right now. It's interesting to see the difference because we literally live right next door to each other. We live in the same climate and our fields look very different. Now I will say our fields are nowhere near as good as they could be with like years of regenerative agriculture on them. We've, like I said, I think it's only been maybe 4 months or so that we've actually had the sheep on our property. So we actually have not been able to do a whole lot yet, but it's really exciting still to see the difference in the different types of plant life that is growing on our property using regenerative practices. So if you guys do have any questions, I don't want to keep going on and on, but I have a lot of information I could share about this. If you guys do have any questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the comments below. Obviously, I'll be doing more videos about this as well too, especially as you know, different seasons roll around. I'll kind of show you what the land is looking like after so much time of having these practices done on them. But do keep an eye out for a video that I'm going to be doing about what we do have going on our property right now. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer them. Hope you all have a great day. Bye.